elite class, from universities to the media, that have a pathological hatred of Israel. They would never consider themselves anti-Semitic, but they're quite open in their opinion that only Israel is the source of all the problems in the Middle East. This is intellectually dishonest and devoid of reality, but too many people have accepted their lies as the truth. And then there is technology. 70 years ago, Joseph Goebbels used newspapers, films, and marches to infuse hatred of Jews into mainstream society. Today, the power of the internet sends out a constant stream of anti-Semitic ideas at hyperspeed. And there are not enough people speaking out to counter these lies. Do you want to know what it's like to be openly Jewish in Europe today? Just go to YouTube and watch what happens when a young man simply walks down a European street wearing a yarmulke. He is insulted, shoved, spat on, and as we saw in France, Jews who are openly Jewish can also be killed. Once again, like the 1930s, many European Jews live in fear. Members of this committee, in my travels to all the communities, I've always asked the same question around Europe and the world. I've been asked, where is the United States? Why isn't the United States leading the world in that crisis? Right after the attacks on Charlie Hebdo and the kosher grocery store in Paris, over 1 million people marched in defiance of those murders. Many of the leaders of Europe and the world linked arms in solidarity in the very front row, but there was not one U.S. representative with them in the front row. I believe this sent a very negative message around the world. European leaders have stepped up and strongly condemned these attacks on Jews and the rise of anti-Semitism. The United States must do the same. The United States must lead. When a neo-Nazi party like Jobbik in Hungary or Golden Dawn in Greece wins substantial votes in elections, the United States must condemn, in the strongest possible terms, these anti-Semitic parties. My fear is that muted condemnations, or worse, silence, could lead what we saw in Europe 70 years ago. And that led to the death of 60 million people and destruction of a continent. We must insist that European nations better share intelligence on anti-Semitic Islamic hate preachers. All countries must better monitor radical Islam recruiting in prisons and on the internet and in mosques. And without question, we must closely monitor European and U.S. nationals returning from the Middle East and America and Africa. The United States can and must speak loudly and clearly to condemn this evil for what it is, the radical Islamic hatred of Jews. Mr. Chairman, one of the bravest men in history, Sir Winston Churchill, came to Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri in 1946. And he warned us that the Soviet takeover of Eastern Europe was complete and an Iron Curtain had descended across the continent. Churchill was trying to wake up a sleeping world because too many people didn't want to believe him. We had just fought a war against totalitarianism, and we were tired. We didn't want to fight another one. Well, today, It's not an iron curtain that is ascending across Eastern Europe. It is a white-hot fire, and its reach is much greater. This new incandescent flame is scorching the entire Middle East, from Tehran, across Iraq, and through Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and now Yemen. It stretches across parts of North Africa, and it destroys everything in its path and leaves nothing alive, not Jews, not Christians, and not Muslims. Who don't share their exact beliefs. Unless we act now, the flame of radical Islam could stretch across all of Europe as well. After Churchill's speech in Missouri, it took 44 years and billions of dollars to defeat Soviet communism. We were focused back then. We were committed. We were united with our allies, and we were able to win the Cold War without horrific bloodshed. But in order to defeat this new flame of radical Islam terror and survive, the United States must lead. I fear that if we don't stand up to this new foe immediately, it will take us much longer than 44 years to defeat it. I feel it will cost us much more of our treasure, and most tragically of all, I feel it will consume many, many more lives, not just in the Middle East and Europe, but here as well. Members of the committee, we must not let this happen again. Thank you.
Ambassador Lauder, thank you very much for your very powerful and sobering comments to the committee and by extension to the Congress and to the American people. Thank you. I'd like to now recognize Mr. Roger Cukierman.
Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee. Jews have lived in France for the last 2,000 years. 1,000 years ago, at the time of the Crusades, the famous Talmudist Rashi was living in the city of Troyes. He was producing wine, a typical French job, and he was also famous for his expertise in Old French language. More than 200 years ago, in 1791, at the time of the French Revolution, French Jews were given the full French citizenship. Today, we are 500,000 Jews in France, a little less than 1% of the French population. And the CRIF, which I chair, is the roof body of the French Jewish institution. It's comparable to the President's Conference of major Jewish institutions. Today, in 2015, our synagogues and our Jewish schools have to be protected by the police and even by the army with machine guns. Why is that so? Because there is a world war started by middle-aged barbarian fanatics who are cutting heads, stoning women, killing kids, and want to impose to the rest of the world the Sharia, their concept of what Islam should be in their views. The first victims are the moderate Muslims. This is a war against Western modern civilization, and the Jews are seen by these jihadists as a privileged target. We Jews are the sentinels at the forefront of this war. But we are not the only victims. Military forces, policemen and women, journalists are also targeted and killed. These jihadists are acting under different names: Daesh, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, AQMI, Hamas. It started in the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Gaza. It reaches Africa, Mali, Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, Tunisia, and now Europe, France, Belgium, Denmark. In France, small children were killed in March 2012 in Toulouse at blank point at the entrance of the school by Mohamed Merah. In 2014, 4 people were killed in the Jewish Museum of Brussels by Mehdi Nemouche. And then in January 2015, 4 people were killed in the Paris kosher grocery store, and then in front of the Copenhagen synagogue. All victims were targeted because they were Jews. All these killers were jihadists. In front of that situation, the French government shows a perfect understanding of our situation. Prime Minister Manuel Valls said that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And President Hollande said that it's not the Jews who should leave the country, it's the anti-Semites. And immediately after the grocery attack, the government added close to 8,000 military to the police forces to protect the Jewish places. From where are these jihadists coming? They come from the Muslim community, which is estimated in France around 10% of the total French population. And the French jihadist is estimated at 1,300 people who are presently combating in Syria and in Iraq, and among them, many French ethnics recently converted to Islam. It seems that these jihadists are generally not influenced by the French imams, not influenced by the press, which they don't read, nor by the TV that they don't watch. They were educated to the jihad in the French jails and by internet. And this is why the CRIF, our organization, bought a full-page ad in the New York Times on the 2nd of March 2015, which was an appeal to our American friends and also to you, asking that they should put pressure on the internet providers to set a limit to the swarm of hate which can be found in internet and to remove anti-Semitic contents as soon as it is flagged. On the internet, ways were found to ban child pornography. Likewise, anti-Semitism must be banned. The providers of internet must understand that they bear a responsibility when murders are committed by youngsters who became jihadists through internet. Now, the question that I'm asked daily is whether there is a future for Jews in France. An increasing number of French Jews are considering leaving France. The French Jewish population, which is estimated at 500,000 people, is the 3rd Jewish community in the world after Israel and the US. In the last 3 years, 2,000 French citizens left to Israel. Others chose the US, Canada, Australia. Many people refuse to see the future of their kids if they have to study in schools or to go to synagogues which appear as fortresses protected by military and heavy gun machines. The atmosphere is tense. One cannot travel in the subway with a yarmulke. Anti-Semitism is active in many suburbs and in many public schools. Nevertheless, I believe that a big proportion of the French Jews will remain in France, where their roots, their culture, incite them to confront adversity as their parents or ancestors did at difficult periods like the Dreyfus Affair or the Vichy period. Thank you, and I'm of course ready to answer any question.
Mr. Cukierman, thank you very much for your insights and counsel and your historical perspective, which is very, very illuminating. Look forward to questions when we get to that point. I'd like to now ask Mr. Asmussen if you would proceed.
Thank you, dear Mr. Chairman, dear members of Congress. It's a great honor for me to testify before the United States Congress, although it's on a sad occasion. You probably think of Denmark as a small and peaceful country, and basically that's also the way we think ourselves. We are people of 5.5 million, 5,000 Jews. Only 2 years ago, October 2013, the Danish society celebrated the 70 years commemoration of the saving of the Danish Jewry from the Nazi onslaught. It was an amazing achievement of the Danish society to stand up, come together, and to save its Jewish minority. The Danish population believed that its Jewish neighbors and friends were an integral of the Danish society, making Denmark a country that could rightfully be defined as righteous among the nations. On February the 15th this year, the Danish society once again came together. This time, in order to mourn the loss of Dan Uzan, a 37-year-old Jewish man who was murdered while protecting the guest at a bat mitzvah party in the Jewish community center. Thousands of Danes came together in order to speak out against terror. While the community was in shock and despair, Danes showed again how much they care for the Jewish citizen. In the days following the attack, thousands of people showed their respect. They laid flowers in front of Copenhagen's synagogue. So on the 15th of February, the Jewish community and the whole Danish society was brutally awoken to a new reality. We had warned the authorities for years that such a day, an attack like this could happen on Danish soil. We had urged them to take warning signs seriously, while we, the Jewish community in parallel, took upon ourselves to safeguard our community. The terror attack against the Jewish community in Denmark did not occur in a vacuum. It did not happen in Copenhagen just by chance. It was, unfortunately, the culmination of years of growing anti-Semitism. It happened in a country where it has become widely acceptable to criticize and question both Israel and Jews with a carelessness that we did not expect or imagine just a few years ago. During the Gaza conflict last summer, a few hundred people were evacuated by police because police could not guarantee them their safety due to aggression from Hamas supporters during a demonstration calling for peace, calling for a two-state solution. A few days earlier, almost 4,000 people signed a petition urging Danish media not to use journalists with Jewish heritage for coverage of Middle East conflict. Yet, it was not before the Jewish school in Copenhagen was vandalized with graffiti that politicians decided to react and speak out against these incidents. It is, however, important to understand that the Danish society itself has never been anti-Semitic, and that many of the threats facing Danish Jewry, like in the rest of Europe, comes from marginalized and radicalized Muslims. And these form, I believe, a small minority of all Muslims in Denmark. The terrorist who committed the two murders was born and raised in Denmark and used his religion to justify the crime. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like he's alone with this view. That was demonstrated when more than 700 people participated in his funeral, cheering at him. At this point, 4 people are jailed, accused of helping him. On the other end of the spectrum, we have witnessed how Muslim organizations spoke out against hatred and prejudices against their fellow citizen. We truly appreciate that expression of support, and we welcome any such initiatives. It's important for me to emphasize that we have good relations with moderate Muslim organizations. We work together on issues of common religious rights. However, we still need for the Muslim community to do more, to become more outspoken against violence and hatred, to confront hate and prejudice towards Jews. The Danish society can only do so much. The real long-term solution needs to be found inside the Muslim community. And we need them to take more responsibility in speaking out against anti-Semitism and against terror committed in the name of their religion. In recent weeks, the Jewish community received strong support from the Danish politicians through the media. We believed it served as a wake-up call, and we expect that our problems will now be taken more seriously than in the past. Last week, Ira Forman visited Copenhagen. Ira Forman is a special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. He made it clear to us that Danish government, in his opinion, is not doing enough compared with other European countries to combat anti-Semitism. And he said that it could never be justified that Jewish community, or any other minority group for that matter, should have to prioritize security over education, or ultimately prioritize security over the future of the community. Mr. Forman is right. If we spend all our resources on security, our children won't have a future. Yet if we fail to protect our children, Danish Jewry won't have a future either. The parents simply won't send them to the Jewish school. We need, at this point, a long-term governmental plan that will keep our community safe as much as possible. The Justice Department has said that such a plan is in the making. And we need the Muslim community to speak out and help in building a democratic, tolerant, and peaceful society. This is the only viable and long-term solution. So we one day will not need to risk the lives of our children in order for them to protect the community as Dan Uzan did. I feel truly grateful towards the Danish society for standing up for the Jewish minority in these difficult times. I just wish they had done so when we asked for help after the incidents in Toulouse and Brussels. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Rasmussen, for your statements and insights. We have been joined by some members who weren't here during opening statements. Before going to questions, I'd like to briefly ask them if they would like to give an opening, beginning with David Cicilline, who's the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for your leadership and for calling today's hearing on responding to the rising tide of anti-Semitism, to give us an opportunity to examine in depth the alarming increase in anti-Semitic incidents in Europe and begin to discuss what approaches should be used to temper this extremism that is unprecedented since the end of World War II. I'd also like to thank our very distinguished witnesses for being here today. Thank you for sharing your assessment of what the current status of anti-Semitism is in Europe and what specific trends you're seeing and what should be done to combat it and how we in Congress can assist. The rise of anti-Semitism and related hate crimes in recent months is beyond debate. While many were awakened to this reality in January when 4 Jewish customers were killed in a kosher market in Paris, days after the attack on the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo that left 12 people dead, anti-Semitism has been on the rise since the early 2000s. The United Kingdom last year, for example, recorded the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents, with the London police reporting an increase of 120% in anti-Semitic crimes in 2014. Most alarming, perhaps, are recent statistics from the Anti-Defamation League that show that an average of 24% of those surveyed in Western European countries harbor some degree of anti-Semitic sentiment, with that number jumping much higher in countries like Greece and France. Furthermore, 66% of Jewish respondents indicated that anti-Semitism was a major problem in their respective countries. In response to the tragic attack in Denmark, where 2 individuals were murdered at a synagogue in February, the Israeli Prime Minister stated, and I quote, "We are preparing and calling for the absorption of mass immigration from Europe. To the Jews of Europe and to the Jews of the world, I say that Israel is waiting for you with open arms," end quote. The chief rabbi of Copenhagen, however, responded, and I quote, "We will not let terror dictate our lives. We will not. We will continue living as Jews here in Denmark and everywhere else in the world," end quote. This environment that is increasingly conducive to anti-Semitic must be dealt with head-on and immediately stopped. The United States has the largest Jewish population in the world, and Jews have contributed greatly to all aspects of our society. Therefore, we have a personal stake in protecting a community that is integral to the fabric of the United States. We need to work together with our European allies to combat anti-Semitism with the same vigor that we have with respect to protecting communities and to combating terrorism and ensuring peace and security around the world. I look forward to working with my congressional colleagues, our European counterparts, and the Jewish community all over the world to develop effective strategies to combat the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and to work to ensure that this hatred is stopped in its tracks. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cicilline. Mr. Clausen.
Thank you for coming today and sharing your personal stories. Mr. Asmussen, I remember the sadness in my father's eyes when the murders took place in Denmark. Clausen is Danish. My forefathers come from about an hour south of Copenhagen in Bors, in Sjælland. My dad has taken me there. My father speaks Danish. And so it hit home to us personally. And I will always remember his face when it happened. And he's told me he was glad his father wasn't here. So your words hit home. And if there's anything that I can ever do, and I'm sure my colleagues can ever do, to influence this in a positive way, I am innately motivated to do so and see the innate unjustness of what is going on with the Jewish community in Europe. I think of your question or your comment that the solution must come from within the Muslim community. That feels hopeful to me. But it also feels like we have to prepare for the fact that that might not happen. And if so, my question for the three of you then becomes, what do we do next? What do we do now? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Emmer.
Well, this is going to work out well, Representative Clausen. I echo my colleagues' comments. I want to thank the chair for holding this important hearing, and I just want to thank everyone, not only the witnesses, but everyone else who understands the importance of this issue and has taken time to be here today. It's amazing how this place works. Things are planned all at the same time, and typically the same committees. But that doesn't, it shouldn't be taken as we don't think this is important. This is of paramount importance. So my apologies for coming in late. My thanks to the chair for having this important hearing and for all of you being here. And let's say the discussion and the testimony and the issue needs to be at the forefront, and we need to keep we need to keep raising it so people understand they can't just ignore it. You need to call things what they are, and you need to address them when they occur. So again, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses.
Mr. Everett, thank you so very much as well. Let me begin the questioning, if I could. At our hearing in February of 2013, Yudi Yasser, who's the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and a very outspoken man against or in the combating of anti-Semitism, made a very, very important insight, provided the committee a very important insight, when he said the link between Islamism and anti-Semitism is rather simple. It is self-evident that supremacists from within a particular faith community will create and exploit hatred towards another faith community in order to collectively rally their own followers against a common enemy. Then he went on to explain how this crowds out a more moderate Muslim view, and he says these theo-fascists use the demonization of minorities as a populist tool to rally populations to their fanaticism. He went on in great depth, and I'll put part of this back into the record because I think it's so insightful, that this is how they push out people who, the Sadats of this world, who reach across the divide and try to, offer a common ground with Jews and with the State of Israel. And I'm wondering what your thoughts might be on that, because it seems as if the extremists win when there is not a counterforce equal or greater to that effort. Secondly, Mr. Asmussen, you mentioned Ira Foreman. I would note for the record that in 2004, I sponsored the amendment that created that office and the position, and very insightful at the time. Senator Voinovich had a bill that I sponsored on the House side. His bill passed, came over to the House, and I worked very closely with members on the other side of the aisle. We had a bipartisan effort to create an office that doesn't just do one report, but makes it permanent time and time again to do reports to monitor anti-Semitism and to create this position to work within the State Department as well. And I would appreciate your thoughts on how well you think that office might be doing. But at the time, 2004, Colin Powell, who was then Secretary of State, wrote a letter against the office, against the amendment. He thought the Human Rights Bureau could handle it all. It was reminiscent of what Bill Clinton did when I authored the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and sitting right in front, and it became law. He did sign it eventually. But the State Department sent over a letter saying, the Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, that it will just absorb all of this into the Human Rights Report and just do a little more reporting on it, but don't create a lane where this will be looked at for what it is. Similarly, when we were working with the coalition, and I formed it, of the willing in the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, I was shocked at how many members of Parliament said, why don't we just expand it to everything? Now, I do believe we need to combat anti-Christian beliefs and all the others. I've had hearings on it, what's happening. And I know, Mr. Ambassador, you have spoken out very forcibly on that. But there's a specific sense of disproportionality to how Jews are singled out. Look at our own FBI statistics on hate crimes relative to belief of faith. Christians far outnumber all numbers in the country, yet less than 10% of the FBI hate crimes are committed against Christians. Ditto for Islamists or Muslims in this country. Not so for Jews, who make up well over 60% of all the hate crimes, even though they're only 2% of the population. It is so disproportionate, it cries out for a single focus. So, and even as we were doing the conferences, there was always this move by the Dutch and by others to just make it about xenophobia and about other issues, always to exclude and, in my opinion, reduce in its focus the issue of combating anti-Semitism. So your thoughts on that, again, on whether IRA and how well you think that committee is working. And then finally, I would just say, I have other questions, but I want to make sure my colleagues get time to answer those as well. So please, if you could begin.
I believe Congressman Mr. Clausen asked me a question. I understand fully your skepticism towards getting the collective Muslim community in order to confront hate and prejudice. I understand it. because what we see in Denmark, and I talk to many Jewish leaders here, and it's the same all over. The Muslim community tends to be very fractioned. You will never tend to find a body as we do within the Jewish community. And I believe if we find racism and hate in Jewish community, we will confront it. The problem is it doesn't happen that often. But I see some changes. I mean, sometimes you have to also look at the positive notes, and there are a few positive notes. Muslim organizations coming up with ideas like peace rings about synagogues. There are not many Muslims participating in these initiatives, and I would not like to exaggerate, but there is a change. And so when you ask what is done now, there's a lot of things in Denmark being done by the government. I mean, there's after Paris, there's a huge catalog of anti-terror legislation being rolled out. It seems like the murder, he was known to the system. I mean, he was, many people had reported him to the police intelligence again and again. He was released from jail 3 weeks before he killed. He went to the authorities to get help getting a flat. No one did anything. So there is a lot of things that the community can do. You can do many things to spot radical behavior earlier, but also you can also do a lot, and we're working on that in Denmark right now, in order to spot and help people. But on the long term, nothing will change unless the mentality change. If it's legitimate for religious leaders to teach hatred towards Jews, nothing will change. And we have cases in Denmark that imams has been doing exactly that, and it takes a lot of time for the system to come down on them. So they keep on doing these things. We are having organizations speaking intensely on hatred toward Jews, but it's very hard to outlaw them according to Danish legislation. We're looking into it, but in my opinion, on the long term, the solution has to come from within.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, we're talking about Europe. Anti-Semitism is alive and well in this country. Starting off, it is taught. Children are born without hate. They are taught hate. It's most prevalent in our universities, campuses. We have an organization called Caravan for Democracy, which is a Jewish National Fund does. We go on campuses all over. The amount of anti-Israel, which morphs into anti-Jewish, has happened all over. It's happening because there is an organized group putting money into these things to put pressure on Israel, but it goes into anti-Jewish also. The media is guilty, very guilty. I watched CNN during the Gaza war. 95% of it showed people in Gaza being killed. There was almost no coverage of the 4,000 rockets going to Israel. We watch it and it has an effect. And anti-Semitism is also learned at the dinner table. When a mother and father are sitting there and they watch television and they watch what happens and they see reporting that is so biased, and they say to each other, look at those Jews, what they're doing to people. Look how they're killing people. The children hear it and they repeat it. And what happened is that there was no understanding in media about what can be done. We watch, we monitor what's happening on the internet. It is disgusting what we see and the amount of things that go on, and yet there is no regulation against it. Anti-Semitism is going to morph into anti-Christian and anti-Muslim at times. We are at the beginning of something that is very, very dangerous, not only for Jews in Europe, but Jews throughout the world, as well as Christians, and for that matter, Muslims. We ask ourselves, why isn't there more Muslim moderates? Because they're scared to death. If I was a Muslim and I was a moderate, I'd be worried for my life, because there is a feeling, it's not just, we'll vote and see who's right. There's a whole radical things, and it's taking over the country. It's taking over what's happening. And in many ways, what's happening in Europe is the canary in the mine. And the fact is that what's happening there will be happening here very shortly unless we react. And I commend the committee for taking this up, but look at it not for Europe, not for Denmark, not for France. Look at it for the world, and look at it what's happening in our college campuses. It's something there. We also see that in mosques, the amount of hatred against Jews, but also against America is there. We have monitored mosques, and we see what's going on. Mosques are a place should be for love, understanding, help. Too often, they're places of radicalism. We hear this, we know this, we've seen it, but the fact is there are no laws against it. There's no laws against what you can say, and that is the danger. There's no law that what you can say on the internet or on media, and we see it. And we're just a small segment here. You have 40 countries here. Each one country can sit here and testify what's happening here. We speak among ourselves, and frankly, we feel powerless. And I think if I asked every person, what's the one place we look towards? We look towards the United States. We look towards the United States for the help and the understanding, because it's the one country that stands up for religious rights in a very strong way. We need the Congress. We need your help. We need people, not only this committee, but a whole looking at what laws. You mentioned about Ira Foreman, what went on. Here's one person that you try to get in. You had people fighting it. There was a feeling also that people don't want to see this. They want to stay away from it. We had a situation in California recently where a girl wanted to join an organization, and because she was Jewish and was part of a Jewish organization, she was denied it. There should have been a huge outcry, and there wasn't. And again, Roger Cukierman is fighting a battle. He's fighting a battle. The French government is there, but there's very little he can do. If you have 6 million Muslims, even if 1% of them, and using math without a computer, it's still 60,000 people who could be radical. What do you do about that? There's no laws about it. Canada has just started to look at different laws that can be done. We must have type of things here in this country. It must be a chance for everybody to turn around and say, this is the model. These are what should be done. And we're allowing it to happen. Sorry.
Yes, I want to say also that anti-Semitism is not the problem of the Jews. It's the problem of the society. And it's not neither a European problem. It's a world problem. And we are in a war with the jihadism. The jihadism is the fanatic Islam. And you were the first victims of that phenomenon on 9/11. I think that 9/11 was the first step of that war. We are in a war, and I wish somebody asked among you, what can you do? First of all, you have to realize that you are in a state of war. And secondly, you have to react at that state of war. One of the things which you can do is to see to it that internet stops being a school to educate jihadism.
Thank you. Mr. Deutsch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for giving me the opportunity just to sit in. I have another hearing. I appreciate it very much. Thanks for holding the hearing to you and Ranking Member Bass, and thanks for your leadership on this and so many other human rights issues. I appreciate the witnesses being here today for offering their testimony. It's very helpful for members of Congress to hear how the growth of anti-Semitism in recent years is viewed from a European perspective. And I just make a couple of quick observations. We know that an overwhelming majority of the world's Jewish population lives in the United States and Israel. But in Europe, where centuries-old Jewish life was decimated by the Holocaust, the Jewish community that remains faces a growing animosity that's creating a very real security threat, which your testimony here is so helpful to highlight. It's not to excuse, as Ambassador Lauder pointed out, it's not to excuse our own homegrown anti-Semitism. It certainly exists. The fact is, it made up more than 50% of the religious bias-based hate crimes in 2013. But it is informative. It is helpful to hear how countries around the world are responding to intimidation tactics, to pressure, to deadly attacks on the Jewish populations. The world, as Ambassador Lauder said, and as we've heard repeatedly and rightfully and importantly throughout your visit the past couple of days, the world has to take action because of what the rise of anti-Semitism means, not just to the Jewish communities in Europe, but because of what the rise of anti-Semitism means to all countries that allow it to persist, what it actually portends for others. And so I think we have to take action. I am proud to have joined with my colleagues, many of whom are on the dais here today, the chairman in particular, to form the bipartisan task force for combating anti-Semitism. The purpose being that we want to try to help our peers in Congress understand the real and growing threat posed by anti-Semitism globally, to allow members of Congress to interact with the administration and to interact with NGOs and partners abroad, to devise innovative ways to try to address and to address these issues, to curb the threat and to attack it at its source. And I just finished, Mr. Chairman, by again highlighting that anti-Semitism matters to everyone. It's not just the Jews, but to every citizen in the world who values human rights. It's a shared threat. It's a threat that we have to work together to address what is our common problem. And Ambassador Lauder, as you point out, efforts to mask anti-Semitism in some sort of anti-Israel rhetoric should be exposed for what they are. Ultimately, the threats posed by anti-Semitism are a threat, as I said, to all of us more broadly. Your participation here, Mr. Chairman, your willingness and your willingness to hold this hearing and your commitment to this issue means an enormous amount, and I'm grateful to be able to just stop by to participate. Thank you so much for yielding the time.
Mr. Deutsch, thank you very much for being here and for working this issue so long and so hard yourself. And we do have now we've just revitalized and reconstituted a task force on combating anti-Semitism with 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats as co-chairs. We hope to invite, frankly, the entire Congress, the House that is, to join us. We've had this before, but I think having 4 co-chairs on each side will further demonstrate the significance of this commitment, that we really want to see action. I do have questions that I'll ask a little bit later, but I would like to yield to, we're joined by the gentleman from Arizona, Trent Franks, who's the chairman of the Constitution Committee for the Judiciary Committee. He's been back and forth because he too has a markup going on, but he's also chairman of the Religious Freedom Caucus. So it's really a privilege to welcome him to the subcommittee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the committee here for just allowing me the privilege to sit in on this. I am grateful to everyone that is here. You know, I know that we've had anti-Semitism in the world for a long time, but it does seem like in recent days that it has surged, and I'm incredibly encouraged and discouraged about all that. And my biggest fear is that somehow the countries of the world would somehow believe that America's commitment to Israel has diminished because that is of a strategic significance to make it clear to the world that America is firmly with Israel and that Israel is with America. I'm convinced that Israel is as important to America as America is to Israel. I know of no people on earth that contribute more to the cause of humanity than the people of Israel. And Mr. Chairman, you know, I brings to my mind a quote by Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah that really, I think, puts it in perspective. This is a jihadist that would do everything he could to destroy Israel if he could. And he said, you know, we've discovered how to hit the Jews where they are most vulnerable. The Jews love life, so that's what we shall take from them. We will win because they love life and we love death. Now, that's a very frightening equation, to face an enemy that loves death and is willing to embrace death in order to destroy another people based on just a bigoted point of view. And I would suggest to you, Mr. Chairman, that should be reason for great concern on the part of all of us. The Jewish people have demonstrated a history that is unparalleled. When the Holocaust was over, if any people in the world had reason to quit, I suppose it was them. But instead of being crushed and instead of completely giving up, they got their revenge by living. They dried their eyes and they looked up again and they began to build. And they built a community and they built a nation. And today they are a force in the world for good. And today the Nazis are gone and Israel remains. And Mr. Chairman, I think that we need to all be very committed to make sure that tomorrow the jihadists will be gone and Israel will remain. And I am grateful to you, sir, for this very valuable hearing. I think it's important that the world and the people of Israel know that some of the rhetoric that's come from our administration lately does not reflect the heart of the Congress. And with that, sir, I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman Franks. Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again to our witnesses for your extraordinary testimony. My first question is, I know that there are some who have observed that there's a sort of emergence of this kind of new normal, and Ambassador Lauder, you sort of made reference to this in the context of anti-Semitism, and that is the blurring of distinctions between being anti-Israel and anti-Jewish, in which anti-Jewish remarks and sentiments are kind of becoming more socially acceptable. And so I'm wondering whether you think that that is happening in Europe, what's your assessment of that? And following that, one of the things that we're learning is that there is, some have written that there is a significant underreporting of incidents of anti-Semitism, and that, of course, hampers our ability to kind of respond to it and help encourage people to craft responses to it. And do you think that it remains an issue, particularly in Europe, and what can we do about that? So that's my first question. Maybe Ambassador Lauder, you could start.
There's no question that the anti-Semitism today starts as anti-Israel. No question. But it's not in Europe, it's worldwide. And we hear it. We also have, yes, there's underreporting, because very often when a child comes home from school and has been beaten up because he was Jewish, what is the mother going to do? Is she going to call the police and report it? Or she just says, look, tomorrow don't wear a yarmulke, or take a different way. And the amount of unreporting is amazing. But also, I heard a couple minutes ago about anti-Jewish and life and loving life. It's also anti-Christian. We looked in the Middle East where there used to be Jews and the Jews left. Now there's almost no Christians left in the Middle East because of what's happening. And the thing that we can't keep missing is that what is happening to the Jews is going to happen to everybody along the way unless it's stopped. And the concern I have, and the concern that I'm delighted this committee is here, is that we must do something more than either appoint somebody or have hearings. We must start to look what type of laws there are, what can be done, can we be a model, can we stand up in the world? There is no place like the United States to be able to stand up and do it. And countries should know that if they have things that are anti-Semitic, they have to pay a price, not only for the small Jewish communities, be it Denmark and many other countries, don't have the strength to fight the government. The only chance they have is looking to the United States and looking to the United States as a model of what it goes. I'm sorry to be so passionate about it.
No.
See
Don't apologize.
what is happening in this world.
I have an example of anti-Zionism turning to anti-Semitism. In this summer, at the period summer 2014, at the time of the Gaza war, there was a demonstration in Paris of 35,000 people in favor of the Palestinians, mostly Muslims. They didn't shout death to Israel. They shouted death to the Jews. And from that demonstration went out hordes of people, and they attacked 8 synagogues and Jewish shops. What is the link if it's not anti-Semitism? Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
I agree when you say there's somehow a presence of underreporting. Danish Jews basically stopped wearing yarmulkes many years ago. They don't dare. If they did, there are areas of Copenhagen where, as Mr. Lauder said, you will not be able to go without getting beaten up. So that's for sure there's underreporting. In Denmark, we see primarily left-wingers demonizing Israel. And this tends to legitimate this hate towards Israel, towards Jews, that is widespread within the Muslim minority.
Could you speak to whether or not there have been, in countries that have been effective in European, either in the EU or the EU itself, in terms of responding to anti-Semitism, that have, implemented effective strategies? Are any of the countries doing it well? Is the Organization for Security and Cooperation doing anything? Are there things the EU could be doing that they're not doing? I mean, are there, we've identified, I think everyone understands this is a serious problem, but is there any?
The closest I've heard is what Canada is doing, and I have not seen yet, but I spoke to the ambassador last night, and he told me, the Canadian ambassador, he told me some of the things they're doing. But to this day, they have not confronted it. It's a fear. Of a fear, and you don't know how to confront it. How do you stop teaching of anti-Semitism in schools or in different mosques? How do you do it? And the question of freedom of speech. Is a freedom of speech to be able to say in a mosque that the Jews are the bad people in the world? What is the laws on that? It's a very, very delicate thing. What's the laws on freedom of speech on the media when they report things one-sided? What's the law in it? It's a very, very dangerous thing. We do have laws now, very, very strong laws about segregation, what you can say against black. But it's still a very, very difficult situation when it comes to Jewish things. And also, as I kept saying, it's going to come to Christian as well as Jews.
Thank you. I mean, I hope, Mr. Chairman, that one of the things that we can work on, and I know the chairman is interested in this, is because I do think you're right, so much of this has to do with education. And
Absolutely.
You look at kind of the early years, the formative years of so many young people, and what are they learning? What are they being taught about people of different religious traditions or different cultures? Because I think, as you said, Ambassador, this is taught. Nobody's born a bigot, and nobody's born with this sort of hatred. But what can we do in terms of the assistance we provide and the programs that we fund to be sure that those resources are not going to the teaching of young people to teach hate? And I think that we have a particular responsibility to do all that we can to promote understanding through good education. And I again, thank you, because I think, as all the panelists pointed out, this is not only a problem in Europe, this is a problem all over the world. And, as that saying goes, they begin, and speaking against the Jews, and nobody says anything, and they go down the groups. And this is about valuing the human life of every person and respecting differences and honoring and celebrating our diversity. Can I ask, with the indulgence, one last question? Some have suggested that the rise of anti-Semitism, particularly in Europe, is closely connected to the sort of anti-immigration fervor. And I'm wondering whether any of the panel have a sort of a view on that, and if so, what can be done about that?
I can't say it's anti-immigration. That's a whole different thing. But it has to do very, very much with the times we're having. For example, the whole rise of Nazism came out of a very difficult financial times in Germany and Austria, and all Europe for that matter. It gave rise to it. We watched after 2008, the amount of anti-Semitism rose because once again, as it happened for thousands of years, the Jews became the scapegoats. They looked at one, there was one case in Africa where there were 3 Jews and they were all wealthy. The amount of anti-Semitism in Africa, in that country, was enormous because people look and say it goes in jealousy and what happens. But the fact is you have a confluence of bad economic times, you have a confluence of radical Islam growing leaps and bounds, and you have a question of the media being able to feed this very, very much, and you have a question of the Palestinian-Israeli question going on. But I will say also that what happened during the last 2 or 3 weeks between Israel and the United States has had a marked effect on anti-Semitism. Because when people hear the fight between Israel and the United States, whatever it might be, it has an effect throughout the world of people saying even the best friend of Israel is having problems with them. That gives us the license to start talking also more and more negative.
Well, before I yield back, Mr. Chairman, I think it's an important opportunity to say that while there might be disagreements between individuals or policies, I think it should be clear to everyone in the world that the relationship between our 2 countries is unbreakable. It is built on a set of shared values that will endure forever. And I hope this hearing is an opportunity for us to reaffirm that. But I don't disagree with your conclusion.
We all know that.
Right.
But the world outside does not know that.
I understand. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you for
and I thank the gentleman from Rhode Island for his passion and his willingness to work on this. And I would echo what he just indicated. Headlines are headlines. 30-second sound bites, 60-second sound bites, they sell media. But if anybody is watching this, they need to know that it is the foundation, the friendship, truly the support, both Democrat and Republican, is unyielding and unwavering. And as much as may be made out of that and running that abroad, I think you'll find very quickly that there is a very unified effort to stand up for this particular cause. So I thank the gentleman for bringing it up. Ambassador Lauder, I'm going to go to you first and ask a very quick question, maybe just a series, and then recognize a gentleman from Minnesota that has a different accent than I do, but Mr. Emmer. But Ambassador, one of the issues that you've been driving home is that America must lead on this particular issue, and that when we don't, when we are silent, it has real implications in Europe and abroad. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So if we are to be more than a hearing and more than just words, what is the most powerful way that we can show our support for the Jewish people? Because, it's interesting, we talk about, Mr. Cukierman is talking about Zion versus being Jewish. I've never known anybody that hates a piece of land. And when you really look at the nation of Israel, it's really what it embodies that they hate versus really a geographical location. So what can we do?
We can start talking about it, taking action ourselves, standing up and saying, for example, I gave the example of France and what happened. There was not one person that didn't notice that there was no American presence in that front line. And I must tell you, that symbolism had a major effect on people. It's important that we stand up, that we start talking about it and say there is no room for it. If there is a neo-Nazi party in a country, we must stand up and say that's unacceptable for that country. If we see that there is an anti-Semitic direction of a group, we must say that's unacceptable. That's not there. And I really believe that the time is now.
All right, Mr. Cukierman, how do we balance the line between free speech and truly standing up for hatred? You know, I've been, little known fact, I was born in France, actually, but I've been where there's been a number of demonstrations, pro-Palestinian demonstrations in Paris. And so how do we allow for this free speech, but yet not the results that may come from?
Well, you have the example of pedophilia. The providers of internet were able to fight against pedophilia very efficiently. Why don't they do the same for racism and anti-Semitism? Why don't they do the same against jihad? If they were able to do it for pedophilia, they should be able to do it, because it's extremely important. Because today, this is the main school of education to the jihad.
All right, so let me ask you maybe a little tougher question that you can weigh in on. The United States gives millions of dollars in foreign aid to a number of countries, most countries, in some shape, form, or fashion. If incitement, and that's what I'm hearing you talk about, really it's more about incitement against the Jewish people. If incitement continues to be epidemic, should there be some tie to that foreign aid that where we can get the attention? I'll let you weigh in.
Well, I would not interfere into American policy, but what I noticed, for instance, is that the imams in France are usually paid by foreign countries. Among these foreign countries, there are some countries who are financing Salafism. Other countries are financing Muslim Brotherhood. Maybe America could put pressure on those countries which are friendly to the US and see to it that they restrain their activity on fanatism.
Mr. Asmussen?
When it comes to protecting Jewish minorities, I believe that the US government can also put political pressure on countries that are not taking this threat seriously. There are countries that take this threat very seriously and protects their Jewish minorities. There are countries that don't. And the political pressure from outside, from the United States, I believe, is very crucial. There is some pressure by the World Jewish Congress. You mentioned Rabbi Andrew Baker, OSCE, and Ira Foreman. But the US government can step up this political pressure.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to close with this one story and then yield to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Emmers. I want to encourage each one of you. Ambassador Lauder, you talked about how the narrative during the Gaza conflict was one-sided. It was infuriating to me to see headline after headline after headline to be, and yet I had on my phone a app that's called Red Alert. Many of you may have that on your phone, and I got it. I was talking to the ambassador one day, long before the conflict, and it had gone off 42 times, I believe. This was 11 o'clock in the morning. It was not being mentioned anywhere, no headlines, no nothing. And I asked the ambassador, I said, what is that? And he said, well, it's an app that I have on my phone that's called Red Alert. I said, boy, I would love to have that. At least it would let me know when the missiles are coming in. He said, well, you can have it. The only problem is it's in Hebrew. Well, Hebrew is not normally a normal language in North Carolina. And so we actually went to that and had it translated. And so it's on a number of members' phones, a number of people. I know there's been well over 1 million downloads. And so I'd encourage you as something to be a reminder, because even as recent as January, there were missiles going into Israel. And it's important that we do that. So I thank you, because we've got to change the narrative, Ambassador. I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Emmers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a couple of questions. I will try not to cover old ground. The first one, and I think what I'll do is start with, and am I pronouncing it right, Mr. Cukierman? Mr. Cukierman.
Cukierman.
Cukierman. All right, I apologize. Can you outline for me briefly what measures the Jewish communities of France are taking for their physical safety right now? We've heard testimony, and I'm aware that there are some resources that have been deployed, but what are the communities themselves doing to protect themselves?
Well, we have, first of all, an organization which of volunteers who are protecting the Jewish places, synagogues and Jewish schools mainly, but this has been strongly reinforced recently by the government, because our protectors are not armed. They are just checking that the people who enter Jewish places are not suspicious. But this is the main thing, and we also try to have organizations which it's not easy to enter. We have videos, we have, but it's defense. It's not efficient. I must say that we are very satisfied of the attitude of the French government in the recent events. I'm not generally putting compliments to the French government. I frequently criticized for my past reactions, but in this difficult period, they have been exemplary. The Prime Minister has said very strong words like anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and the President said that it's not the Jews who should leave France, but it's the anti-Semites. And the day which followed the January event, we had immediately the army who joined the police to protect Jewish places. So we don't have to complain about protection. The legislation is a prominent one in terms of fight against anti-Semitism. For instance, Holocaust denial is a crime in France, which is not the case in other countries. And so the laws are satisfactory. The main problem would be education. Because today, in public schools, Jews are not going anymore, because the atmosphere has become so much anti-Semitic that people prefer to pay and go to private schools, either Jewish schools or Christian schools, rather than public schools.
Yeah, but then the problem's not being addressed, apparently, in the public schools, or is it?
Well, nothing has been done in terms of education in public schools in the last 30 years, and there we are terribly backwards.
Mr. Asmussen, same question. What are the Jewish communities doing in Denmark since the incidents to protect themselves?
Basically, after the attacks in Toulouse and Brussels was last summer, we contacted the Danish Ministry of Justice in order for them to improve security around Jewish institutions. Nothing happened. There is security issue. There are, roundings in police cars, and we have, as in France, our voluntarily security guards within the community. But we ask for armed police in front of the synagogue during services, in front of the Jewish school when the kids are there. We didn't get it. We didn't get it. We didn't get it because it was not on the menu in Denmark. Denmark is a small, peaceful country. You don't have policemen on the street wearing guns. Now we do.
Okay.
As in France, it takes people getting killed before they get the message. But what we see now, I believe in France and in Denmark, might not be the long-term solution. And basically, it is too much right now. I have a school of 200 pupils with 8 policemen with machine guns. It is too much. But I need a long-term solution on that issue with the government. I don't have it at this point.
Right.
So now what can I do? I tell you what the government can do.
Right.
But we are trying to put pressure on the government. And on the long run, of course, we can participate in education, learning about Judaism, of course. We can intensify our activities within the interfaith with Christian, Muslim, interfaith activities as we do. But somehow it seems that all those interfaith activities seems to be together with the people with the political correct minds, not the people doing all the anti-Semitic activities.
We have a bit of that in this country as well. Mr. Lauder, and thank you for that. I'm in Minnesota. The chairman referenced the accent, but we have a phrase that I don't know that I want to open this can of worms, but I think I'm going to. We're talking about what the Congress might help with, what this country might help with, what we could do. What about the organization known as the United Nations? What?
It's a joke.
Well, I'm going to open that can of worms. If you could just give me an idea, is the United Nations a lost cause when it comes to this? Is there something that can be done through that organization?
Of the 25 recent cases of attacks on what should be done in religion, 23 were against Israel. The United Nations is perhaps one of the most anti-Israel, anti-Jewish organizations there.
Can I ask a question that's very direct? The response or lack thereof by the United Nations, does that also fuel, in your opinion, an increase in anti-Semitism?
Everything fuels it. The real question is, if you have a case where one country, if Canada attacked Minnesota with 4,000 rockets and you responded, and all of a sudden they took Minnesota to the International Criminal Court for what you did to protect yourself, how would you feel? And the International Criminal Court, I believe, has something to do with the United Nations. That is a symbol of what is happening. And we spoke before about UNRWA and the fact that Palestinians are still receiving refugee status, where the 800,000 people who left the Middle East and came to Israel and things like that don't get refugee status. It's a dual standard that goes on and on. It's something that I know the committee knows very, very well. The real aspect is this is something that's been anti-Semitism since almost right after Abraham. It's something that we've seen all the time. What's happened recently is that anti-Semitism has started to kill people, started to become radicalization. And it's one group of people who are doing it, and the world is turning its back on it, and not really necessarily going after it.
And I'll be done, Mr. Chair, but I think you made the point, and it was an artful answer when everyone is talking.
A diplomatic answer.
A very diplomatic answer, and I do appreciate it and respect it. But if our institutions that are there, I mean, we're talking about the media on one hand, and there's an issue with education in sensitivity and awareness, But when the very institutions that are created to promote peace and to try and help resolve conflict actually don't do that, in fact, by their actions, some could interpret it as fueling the conflict, it's not very helpful. And I don't know that if that's the case, but that's what I was asking.
That's the case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. I thank each of you for your testimony here today. Chairman Smith actually is monitoring this. His staff's monitoring it. He's been having a few health issues. We'll support and actually give some questions for each one of you that you can respond in writing for the record. I'd also ask each of you if you have 2 recommendations on what you would like to see the United States to do. If you would just submit that to the committee, we'll make sure that that gets passed around and we'll take action on that. And so I want to close out by saying there are many times when this battle may seem like we're losing the battle, and indeed many battles have been lost. But ultimately, the victory in the war will be ours if we continue to fight arm in arm and stand arm in arm together. I, for one, and I know a number of my colleagues are willing to do that. So thank you for your testimony. Thank you for being here. God bless. This is adjourned.